Good morning. We're in Bristol. Plans have changed. We were gonna go sit in a cute little coffee shop and do some work, but they didn't allow Freyja in there. She's right here. Frey. I think she's upset that they didn't want her in there. And then we were gonna sit outside and do some work, but the Wi-Fi didn't reach there anyway, and I was using the hotspot, and then these guys were throwing bricks into a truck, and it was really loud, and it started raining. So now we're just sitting on a street, and I have got my phone hotspot to my laptop, and we're just working in the car. We're gonna meet up with a celebrant called Beth, and that's the reason we're in Bristol. But I got here early to do some work on the laptop, and yeah, it's just not really panning out. They did, though, put a smiley face on my coffee cup. We're gonna go meet Beth in a little bit. She's gonna allow us in her home. We're in a very on-brand location for this potty break. This is Freyja. Hi, Wolfie.
Do you want me to talk to the camera or to you? Or?
Whatever. Some people are just like automatically, hey. But we can just
Chop that out. See how we go.
Okay, so I'm here with Beth. How do you pronounce your last name?
It's Nasce.
Nasce.
Yeah.
Okay. So Beth Nasce
Mm-hmm.
from Evertold Ceremonies.
Mm-hmm.
Is that your business?
That's right.
Cool. Beth is a celebrant.
Hi.
And we're gonna talk about what a celebrant is. You do work for weddings as well as funerals,
Yeah.
and naming ceremonies, as you just said. And what else do you do?
So one of my big things is I'm trying to get people to see that we don't just have to celebrate and ceremonize, let's say, marriage, babies and dying.
Okay.
That there are other things we can do in our lives to celebrate other milestones. So, you know, getting a new job or a housewarming. We might have, you know, if you've got a house share and then you have a new housemate come in, there could be some kind of way of, you know, commemorating that. And so what I'm trying to do is help people to make up their own ceremonies, and not necessarily me doing them, but I kind of will walk them through, like, this is how you could make a ceremony. I'm particularly on the scale, on the spirituality scale, let's say. I am a little bit woo-woo myself personally, but I actually quite like working with people who aren't particularly involved in a religion, and so it's that sort of getting away from this idea that, like, the only people that are allowed to make a ceremony are people involved in a religion.
Right.
It's kind of like secular priestess, essentially like a secular version of commemorating other milestones. Within that, funerals is definitely one of my areas that I'm really passionate about in general. So while I love doing weddings and I love naming ceremonies and coming up with new ideas, I actually do find funeral work very rewarding. It's a real privilege to be part of that part of somebody's life, you know.
For people who don't know what a celebrant does at all, and let's just say for funeral, what is your role?
Generally speaking, how it works is that a funeral director will speak with the family, and they will ask if they want to have a religious or a non-religious service. Usually, if people say religious, then they'll go straight to a vicar. If they say non-religious, or they're kind of a bit like, well, she sort of believed in God, but we don't, and we don't feel comfortable with the church, then they'll organise to have a celebrant. So celebrants are generally, we're all self-employed, I think, the majority of us, and we're all different flavours. So some of us are very they'd call themselves humanist, and they wouldn't want to do any nods to religion at all. And then other people would be, comfortable with adding in, a Muslim prayer, or the Lord's Prayer, or singing hymns, those sorts of things. And really what it's about as a celebrant is trying to create a ceremony that is honouring the person that's died, but also honouring the feelings of the people left behind. So essentially what I do as a celebrant is I will get the phone call from a funeral director, and depending on the funeral director, they try to pair up the family with a celebrant that they think would work well. So might be to do with values and religious views, but it might also just be, this family were quite it's the circumstance of the death is particularly traumatic, and they're really not coping. I know that this person is very grounded and is very capable of dealing with this extra emotional layer. Or it might be a kind of, this person was very quiet, so actually and I know that this celebrant is really good at bringing bringing people out of their shells a bit, and helping to ease the storytelling side of it. In a nutshell, we do the ceremony. I'd say that's essentially what a celebrant is the person that will do the ceremony at the crematorium usually, but it can be elsewhere. But the work isn't just sort of turning up and reading a script that we've read hundreds of times. The whole point is going to the family, really understanding what they want, learning as much as they can about the person that's died, because the majority of time I will never have met that person, so it's trying to get a clear image of who they were, what stories were important to the family, and then creating a funeral script that honours both the person that has died, and then also gives space to the family to feel what they need to feel. We never know what we feel until the day. So
what about families who maybe don't have, they're doing it very DIY, like they're not even maybe going to use a funeral director. I think that's pretty rare, but if someone were to do more DIY funeral, they could still seek you out and call you.
Yeah, so one of the things, even if you weren't doing a DIY funeral and you were going with a funeral director, if you have a celebrant in mind, you're more than welcome to say to the funeral director, my Auntie June had Beth, we would like her to do my mum's or whatever. So it's the only reason generally that I would get called by a funeral director is just because people generally don't have an idea, and so they won't know to pick someone.
I see.
Yeah, but you can also, if you're doing a DIY funeral, you just Google celebrants in my area, and people will come up, and I'm sure that you'll find the person that kind of fits your vibe and who kind of resonates with you. And then also, you could also list a celebrant if you're planning a funeral. So, whether someone's terminally ill or they're planning their funeral now when they're healthy, they could always say, this particular celebrant or somebody similar. Because you never know, they might be retired by the time you die. So, but yeah.
So people, if someone's making an advance directive or some kind of a will, because some people put funeral wishes in their wills, they could even say I want this person, I want Beth to be my celebrant at my funeral.
Yeah, definitely. So it's one of those things where with funeral wishes, it is quite important for people to know that these are not legally binding. So,
Right.
you know, as much as it's one of those things where I think it's really important for people to have their wishes known, even if it's just as simple as, you know, I want to be buried and I want to have this song played. It just gives your family or your loved ones a clue as to what you actually want. And even if the rest of it they're kind of guessing, even just those two little things just sort of anchors them a bit. So I would say, like, you could definitely list a specific celebrant, but it's just one of those things where just be aware that, you know, that celebrant might not be available on that day. They might have moved away, they might have retired, they might not even be a celebrant anymore. So it's just one of those things to remember that, like, while it's great to have in your wishes and your intentions, like, just remember that it may not be it. Like, you don't want to make your family feel like, oh my god, well, that one celebrant is no longer available.
What do we do?
It's, you know, so that's the only thing I would say about that.
Right. But again, it kind of gives, like, if that were to happen, they could see, oh, this is like a celebrant that does kind of more unique or non-denominational ceremonies, and maybe I'll look for someone like that.
Yeah, exactly.
As a backup.
That's right. It sort of gives you a clue as to, like, oh, okay, oh, that was the type of celebrant they were interested in. And then, you know, and even as an example, let's say someone did ring me and I'm not available that day. I've got, you know, 15 celebrant friends who I can find the right person for them. So, and that works with weddings and everything else as well. So, yeah.
Has anyone ever hired you for a celebration of life? So to do a ceremony for someone who hasn't yet passed away, but they're, you know, maybe terminally ill or...
Not yet, no, but it's definitely something I'd be interested in. Yeah, I think, love the idea of it. I don't know if you ever remember this programme on the BBC when I was a kid. It was called This Is Your Life.
No.
And it was basically like a famous person who has been in the business for a long time, and then they just have people kind of coming up and giving, like, nice chats about how lovely that person was, and, you know, all that sort of thing. So it's pretty much like a live funeral, I'd say. Yeah. I think what's important for people to understand about a celebrant is that it's that, you know, even from a wedding point of view, like, I have helped family members do a ceremony in the past, and it's great, but it is the whole point of the celebrant is they're like a master of ceremonies. They're quite a guiding force, I would say. So we have a very clever way of, like, being very commanding of an audience while not making it about us. So it's, while people, I think, have this lovely idea of, like, oh yeah, well, we don't need a celebrant, we'll just, like, say some nice things, and they kind of dash it off as, oh, well, that's just another expense, or, you know, that sort of thing. But actually it's the emotional space holding that we do, I think, that's where the important bit comes from. It's less, yes, the script is important, and we, you know, want to make sure that we're saying things that fit the person, and we're hoping that people can, you know, find comfort in our words and things like that. But really it's about the mood that we can create. And I think when you're grieving yourself, it must be a very difficult, you know, you're either going to feel like, I can't grieve because I'm focusing too much on everyone else, or you break down and then no one else can really go through the ceremony either. So I think that's where it's good to have a celebrant, or at least have a celebrant to sort of coach you through creating a ceremony, is what I would say.
Yeah, and on a more practical note, you know, because a lot of times you can only book a service that's 30 minutes long, and I think particularly when people are grieving, it can be really difficult to keep track of that time and keep on track with all the music and all the eulogies and
Yeah.
poems and stuff.
Definitely.
So having a celebrant to have, keep
Yeah.
on the structure is
That's
really
right.
valuable.
Yeah, I think as well, like, because of like the way you're trained, and the more you do, the better you get at them. But like, you start to gauge like how a service flows, and people might say, I've had funerals before where these friends wanted to give a tribute. They didn't really want to write anything down. They were like, oh, it'll probably be about 5 minutes, and but like, I think 5 minutes in your head is very different to 5 minutes in real life, and both of these speeches ended up being about a minute long. And it's like, okay, and it's less about me like padding and just being like, oh well, we've got to eke it out to get to half an hour. Like, if it ends up being 20 minutes, it's 20 minutes, but it's that thing of like starting. I'm a bit more able to gauge, like, okay, yeah, usually this sort of takes this long, or like when I've read out my eulogy to myself, I can time, stopwatch, and then I can add on minutes and things of transitions and stuff.
Not a whole lot of people have been to as many funerals as you have, just simply due to your work.
Sure.
And I'm wondering if that has had any impact in your personal life.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. I think the thing that's really struck me the most when it comes to funerals particularly is how much people don't actually remember, or the things that they remember, let's say. So I'll meet with a family, and they'll be, I'll say, oh, what kind of words would you use to describe him? And they'll say things like, funny and kind and all these, and I'll say, oh, can you give me an example of, is there like a story that really shows us how he was kind? And they'll kind of just be like, don't know really, and they just it's like certain things sort of vanish at that time, and then random things will come in. So they'll be like, oh yeah, I used to love the way he always put the milk bottle top back, or whatever it might be. And then it's sort of, I don't know, I mean, I'm a big fan of not making a eulogy just like a CV of like, and then he went to here, and then he had this job, and I try to make it more telling a story. But it is interesting, like, people think that as a celebrant I want to hear like, okay, and when did he leave that job, and when did he move to this house, and what year did you get married? And it's kind of like, those things are helpful for timelines, but actually, like, what's a funny story that I'm trying to think what, like when they went on holiday and he fell in the bin or something, and fun, like, it's just funny how the things that come out in the conversations and what people remember. And it's made me think from a personal point of view of like all these stories I have of myself, and I'm a massive like journaling fan, and I write all these things, and I think like, I wonder what people will remember about me when I do die. That like all these things that I find important might not be interesting or important to anybody that loved me, but they might tell some random story that I don't even remember, and so that's definitely something that's really made me like think about how this whole death works. I think as well, one of the big things that's really changed for me is, so I basically grew up with bereavement. So my dad died when I was 2, or nearly 2, so I don't remember him. Yet I've been able to talk about death very comfortably my entire life, and I didn't realise until I started working in the death world that like, actually that's, number one, quite special, because not everybody can, but also that like, just because I can doesn't mean that I am always right, and that the way I talk about death is correct. And because a friend of mine also lost her dad quite young, and we often talk about how we can kind of talk about death in a very jokey way, and like be quite, to people on the outside it's like, oh yeah, why are you saying things like this? But it's like, we just can do that. And it's rather than sort of looking at people and seeing them as like death prudes, it's just made me realise, yeah, that's what I call it. Rather than kind of thinking, oh God, lighten up, or oh, people are so uptight about death, it's like, it's softened me a lot, and it's made me realise that like my grief is a gift in a, not a very, you know, it's not a nice gift, but it's still a gift. But it's to be used responsibly, and it's not about going, you know, well, come on, we all just have to talk about death, and because we should all be able to talk about it. Like, yes, we should, but there's compassion to be had there as well. So
yeah, definitely. I think that's something that we all in this end of life field need to be aware of. That we need to meet people sensitively where they're at. I think that many people can be a bit abrasive with others regarding not wanting to talk about death or you know, have anything to do with it really.
Yeah, I guess it's just reading the room, isn't it?
Reading the room, just feeling the energy of if someone isn't comfortable, you know, don't force the issue.
Yeah, definitely.
It's not fair if they don't want to talk about it.
So the other thing I was going to say, you said about like you know, a ceremony being generally half an hour in the creme. That it's also very good to know that a funeral doesn't have to be in a crematorium or a church.
Right.
It can be anywhere.
Right.
Subject to venue, I always say this, subject to venue's permission. Because obviously, for some venues, the thought of like there being a coffin there worries them, because they think, oh well, you know, if we've got other like say it's a hotel, and like we wouldn't want our guests to see some coffin.
Right.
But I think a lot of places would be open to it if they knew that actually this is an option, that they don't just have to do a wake, they could do the whole thing. And the beauty of that is that then you have all the time to do the whole ceremony. You know, you've got as long as you want, basically. You're not bound by the sort of half-hour slot at the creme. You've got, you know, it could be an hour if you wanted it to, and it could be a whole day of a party, that sort of thing. Obviously it's finding the right funeral director that would be able to accommodate that, but so far in my experience, funeral directors, I think sometimes they can get a bit of a bad reputation from like the corporate side of things, that it's like they can be quite I don't know what the word is, but you know, they'll channel you into making quite plain decisions, or you know,
or like upsell you or something.
All of that stuff. But I think generally, if you ask the funeral director, I want this, they will do their best to make it happen. And I think, so that's something as well, just to bear in mind that, and this as well, like going on to the funeral director side of things, I do think that when a family comes to them and they have no idea about what they wanted, what they would want, it's I can understand that from a funeral director's point of view, it's like, right, well, we haven't really got much time to give you hundreds of options, so do you want this, do you want that, do you want this crematorium or that crematorium, which coffin would you like, and it can feel like you're being pushed into a decision, but when they've got nothing to go from, I can see why. If you come to them with a bit more of a, oh, we definitely want this sort of thing, we don't like that crematorium, actually he'd like to be buried but wouldn't want to be in a church, you know, all of those sorts of things, and they already have a clearer picture on like how they can make it happen for you.
Exactly. Is there anything else you'd want to say?
Well, I guess the other thing just going on that, so talking about plans, is one service I do also provide is a funeral planning, I call it a funeral planning workshop.
Okay.
So it's not a session where at the end of it we have this big sort of will-like document, but what we do is we walk through all the aspects of a funeral, and we think about, first of all, what would you like, and the idea generally is to try and do this sort of now when you're well,
right,
because there's no emotional there's less emotion attached to it, number one, but it's also that whole, when I think it's very important to do it, I think, when you are, if you do get a terminal illness, that for lots of people that can be a very empowering thing. But actually, when it kind of gets way towards the end of life, it's almost like there's too many other things going on. You're also worrying about provisions for your family and all of those things. So actually kind of doing it now when you're well, you kind of get to think about it in a more objective way, and you can be less it's less emotionally charged, I would say, and less urgent. And the idea of it as well is that it's more just a chance for you to think about it. Actually, do you know what, this is actually really important to me, or actually I realise that I don't really care what happens to that part of the funeral or whatever. So we kind of go through aspects of a funeral and end of life, but also what are the things that you value, what are the things that actually you'd quite like your family to decide, because there might be you, for example, might not be that into music, and music often is quite a big part of a funeral, so actually maybe your daughter might be a better person to choose the music, because they'll have a better idea of, they'll have musical memories with you and that sort of thing. And then there's the bits that, like, it's sort of like blue sky thinking, like dream funeral, like your dream wedding. What would you love it to look like? But if it didn't happen, it wouldn't be the end of the world. And so it's sort of like your values, your personality, and then your loved ones is what I would say. So yeah, that's something else I tried to do. I worked with a woman last week on that, and that was really, it was really empowering, I felt, to sort of, rather than, because I did initially go into it thinking we'd come up with this sort of document together, and as we talked, it just felt more like, actually this is more important for her just to sort of talk through her ideas and her reasons for wanting to plan so far in advance, when she doesn't know when she's going to die, she doesn't have a diagnosis or anything. So it was sort of, it did actually feel like, actually this is more for her to go home with all of this information that I've imparted, but also we've had a chat about, and then she then can make her own document in her own time. And even if it ends up just being a scribbled post-it note, that's fine. It's the point of it is just that, like, somebody in your family knows where it is, because you never know.
Yes. I was going to say that, because I'm just thinking of myself as we do. I don't particularly care what the heck happens at my funeral. Funerals are, of course, for people that are still alive. So I believe that whatever is going to give my family the most comfort will be what I want to happen. And also I don't want them to go bankrupt unless they want to. Like, if they want to spend a bunch of money, that's fine. But I was just going to say that even, like, pre-planning, if you don't care about your funeral, is important, because how is your family to know that is your stance if you don't put things into place? And also it just takes the stress away from them. Like, we're talking about having too many options. Like, wouldn't it be nice for your family if you just had things written down, like, don't spend money on this, I don't care about this, I want a biodegradable coffin, I want you to pick the music, don't care what music it is. Even just saying, like, I don't care, I want this person to be in charge of it, I'm sure would just take away so much like turmoil. Because people don't want to feel that guilt of, I've done the wrong thing, I've not done right by them. If it's all in writing, if it's all in a plan, they know. Like, oh, I'm not going to do the wrong thing because she just didn't care about that. So.
Absolutely. That's definitely the thing I've learned is, I think because I often have a friend of mine's dad always says, oh, just put me in the bin, and it's like, ha ha ha, that's very funny,
but actually something has to happen to you. So what should it be?
And so maybe for him it is like, I don't want any kind of anything extra that needs to be done. But then even that, like, you can do like direct cremation, which is literally the funeral director will take the body to the crematorium and there's no service.
cheapest option.
That is the cheapest option. However,
at the moment,
for the family, that might not be enough, and so there does need to be something perhaps, and so yeah, I think there's like there is definitely an empowerment in just, like I say, little clues even of I want this, don't want that. Yeah, like you say, don't spend any more money than you need to spend, because money as well. People, you think to yourself, there's a 50 quid coffin or 150 quid coffin. Well, am I saying that she wasn't worth the 150 quid coffin?
Yeah.
But if you know that person valued economy, then you'd know that, she would much prefer the £50 one, and so on. So.
Yeah, exactly. Or even just like an urn choice. Mm-hmm. Like you don't have to spend $100 on an urn.
Yeah.
If someone didn't care or just wants to be scattered somewhere, like maybe you just get a cardboard scatter tube and just why does it matter?
Yeah.
Why do you have to spend £100 on like a fancy marble whatever?
And then for other people that might be like, oh no, I'd want my ashes to be, I want to wait till you die and our ashes get put together. Mm-hmm. And so get a nice urn so that we can be in that together for a while, or whatever. So and I think that's the other thing, it's learning that, kind of like with weddings as well, like people, there's often a lot of judgment based on, there'll be some people who'll say, oh, I can't believe people spend that much money on just a day, and they'll scoff at people who buy a dress for £1,000, or they'll spend £5,000 on food or whatever. But for them, having a massive party to celebrate this huge milestone in their life, and they want to invite all their friends, it does cost money. Mm-hmm. Whereas for other people, they might say, oh no, screw that, we'll have 5 guests and we'll go out for dinner or something. Mm-hmm. That's fine. Neither is right or wrong, it's just what's right for you. And I think the same goes with funerals and how much you spend on those. At funerals, people often feel they need to have a poem or a reading. Poetry is amazing because it articulates how we feel in a much more lyrical way than just kind of going, oh yeah, I'm really sad that my dad's died or whatever. But also, like, I think people then find that they end up Googling, like, funeral poem non-religious, and then there will be a link to like a blog that will have the top 10 funeral poems, and then sometimes it's not so much in my experience with the funerals I've done, but funerals in the past I've been to where I just think, oh, you've just Googled like funeral poem in the same way that people Google wedding reading. Yeah. And I just think like the poem, number one, doesn't have to be about death. Mm-hmm. It can be about, if your dad was a massive football fan or a fisherman, you could find a poem that's more suited to a lifestyle, a hobby, those sorts of things. Or you don't have to have one at all. I think sometimes people feel they have to like shoehorn things in. I would always say it's better to keep it as simple and reflective of that person as possible than feel like it has to look a certain way. And even, the eulogy doesn't have to be, you don't even have to have one if you don't want to, or you might just want to have three different family members come up and talk about their relationship or what they'll miss about that person. So from a celebrant's point of view, sometimes I often do the entire ceremony because the family are like, nope, I don't want to speak, and that's absolutely fine. But then I've had funerals where I'm more like a master of ceremonies, so the son did the eulogy and the granddaughter did the poem and all of that, and that again is absolutely fine. Like, it's not as I say, like, it's all about what I do is help people move through a space. I am in charge and people naturally look to me, but they're not looking at me, and it's not about me. But it's not about the celebrant and what an amazing performer they are.
Right.
We do our best and we it's lovely at the end to hear people say, oh, that was such a lovely service, and so, but I'm not doing it because I want praise and attention. I do it because I know I can. Yeah, it's like, so I used to be a teacher, and my head teacher used to say, we tried to be more like the guide on the side, not the sage on the stage. I like that, and that's kind of what I feel like with this work. It's we're not here to put on a show,
right? It's not about that.
Yeah.
Speaking of shows, has anyone ever done like an interpretive dance or like any sort of performance at a funeral that you've been?
No, but I'd love that. I think that would be great. But
I think we should normalize
definitely
different behaviors at funerals.
Yeah, I mean that's definitely something that I find it would be easier to work when if a family approached me specifically and not me via a funeral director.
Right.
I find there's definitely more space and time to go, oh, okay, what could we do? And there might be, I haven't done this personally, but I've seen a funeral before where everyone sat around the coffin in a circle.
Oh, wow.
And they all sort of came up and put like a note on top of the coffin with like a word or a memory and those sorts of things. And I think that's so beautiful. But the problem is that like logistically, you'd already need to be in a space where people can sit around the coffin. Like the crematoriums I work in, there's one catafalque where the coffin goes.
With like a curtain.
Yeah, there's a curtain. Yeah. Everyone's sat very far away from it, and so it's sort of. And then also I find if I'm working with a family via a funeral director, a lot of things have already been decided before I even get there, and there's a bit of like, I don't want to step on the funeral director's toes. A lot of my work is dependent on funeral directors liking me, so I don't want to go too crazy so that they never book me again, and those sorts of things.
You don't want to be known as the kooky, kooky Beth.
I kind of do in a way, but it's that thing of like I say, I've definitely learned this. When I first started, I was very like, oh, we could be really creative, and then kind of realizing that most of the families I've worked with so far just want something very simple, and that's absolutely fine. It's been a bit of a like ego cleanse for me as well. Right. Like I say, it's not about how good I am, it's about what I can do for them.
Yeah.
But I do think like I'd love for people to be able to have the space and time to go, oh, I don't really want to do just like a spoken tribute. I'd love to be able to have everyone stand up and say a word, or I've heard of someone who like they had like a big ball of yarn and sort of threw it around. Everyone sort of ended up with a piece of the yarn, and it was kind of like a symbol of like we're all connected to each other via this person. And so there's all these lovely things we can do that don't involve just sitting, standing, listening, talking, watching a slideshow, as lovely as they are. And it's not about saying like those funerals aren't good enough, but it's just more about saying like there are symbolic things we could do that don't involve words. What I'm trying to say is that like you shouldn't feel guilty if you did decide in the end, oh, do you know what, we haven't got the headspace to think about something creative. I just want to get it done, and because you might find that you're at the time of death, you're just not able to grieve yet, and you're feeling really numb, and you can't think of anything. And maybe in a year's time you think, oh, I would have loved to have, I don't know, we could have done a dance or whatever. Then, get your friends together and do that yourselves. You don't have to have the body there. You don't have to have a celebrant. You don't have to have a funeral director. It doesn't all have to happen at the same time,
there's no rules to say when or how you can celebrate someone's life and in what capacity or whatever. There's no rules about it.
Absolutely.
Thanks for taking the time to
thanks
chat.
for having me.
I'm sure my viewers have learned a lot as well.
I hope so.
Do you have anything like that you can show that's death or funeral related in your house?
was a Dracula themed wedding, so
Whoa.
yeah.
How'd that go?
Yeah, it was good. I'm still waiting on the
How
photos.
does that go on your head?
So it sort of clips like this. Obviously I wouldn't wear this to a funeral unless requested.